Hi. In this video, I will demonstrate common base functions in R that can be used in an initial data exploration. Let's get started. Here are the four main topics that I will cover in this video. First, I will demo how we can import data directly into the R environment. Second, I will use base R functions for preliminary data exploration. Third, I will explain how we can subset specific elements from a data frame or table in R. And lastly, I will demonstrate basic filtering or subsetting of data frames based on some logical conditions. So let's get started with the initial data import. I'm going to start by creating a script rather than typing directly into the console. I'm going to create a new script, okay? And then I'm going to do all of my work here and then save the script later in case I want to reference it later on. There are multiple ways to import data directly into the R environment. For some people, some people prefer using some of these options above here, click on buttons. I personally think this is a bad approach. You should always, try to do things programmatically in a way that you should script it out so that it's easy for you to change things later. And also, if you're going to do something more advanced, like a full-scale data analysis, data science project, or you're going to build a R-Shiny application later on, it's impractical to expect anyone who's editing or doing the development to use some of these drop-down menus to access the data. You do have to figure out ways to do file references, path references, etc. So it's always better, I think, to write things out, script things out. Okay, so I'm gonna do everything in this script here. Okay, the first thing I'm gonna do is figure out what my current work directory looks like. So I'm gonna write get wd and run this line. I'm gonna press Control Enter to run the specific line. And it tells me what my work directory is, current work directory is pointing to. So this is pointing to a specific folder, okay, so our directory. And this, I can, it'll allow me to access, right now this is, I can access the files inside this directory or this folder, but it's probably, I probably want to change this work directory and point it to a specific folder where I have all of my relevant files. So let me go to the desktop and show you a designated folder that I made that I'm going to keep referencing back in some of my other videos as well. So on my desktop right now, I have a folder called R material. And if I open up that folder, I have this CSV file. I probably don't need that. Let's delete that. So I have this folder, I have this file, FYI, that file that I just deleted, that's there because this Boston housing data is a very famous data set or popular data set used in R. I took that data and I actually wrote it as a CSV file into this folder so that we could not import it directly from this folder. Okay, so this is a location, and I probably want to, reference this. I want to get the path to this folder, and I want to read in this CSV file directly. Okay, so the way I can do that is I got to figure out the path to this folder. So I'm going to right-click on the CSV file. I'm going to go to Properties, and I'm going to highlight the location. Okay, so this gives me the path to this file. Okay, I'm going to copy that and press Cancel, and then I'm going to go back to R. Back in RStudio, I'm going to now change the work directory to that folder path. Okay, so I'm going to use the command set wd, set work directory, and then inside the quotes, I'm going to press Control V, and put in that path that I copied earlier. Okay, I do need to change this slashes to backslashes. Okay, so I'm going to change all those to backslashes. Now you may have a folder in a different location, a different path. So your address here or the path may look different. So, mine just happened to be at the desktop. So this is my the work directory I'm going to point it to. Okay, so I'm going to press Control Enter to run that line. Okay, now let's run get WD again. You see now my work directory has changed. And why this is useful, I can now do list.files. Okay, press Control Enter, and this Boston housing data, as you see here, is listed. Okay, so now if I want to read in this file directly, read in this data directly, I could just use the Read Csv command. This is again a base function. I'm going to call this housing. I can call this. It's going to be a data frame when you import it in. I'm going to call it housing. I'm going to do read.csv. That's the base function. And the name of the file is Boston housing.csv. Okay. I'm going to press Control Enter. And now I have this housing object in my environment. Okay, so now I've successfully imported my data in. Okay, and I can actually click on it and it'll show me what that data looks like. Okay, so this is the preferred way is for me to import data in directly. I would not use any of the drop-down menus up here with your mouse. I don't think it's a good idea. This is much better way. Okay, so let's move on to the next topic at hand here. So we just finished importing data into R. Now we'll go to the base functions to preview the data. Okay, R has some very useful built-in functions that you can use to take a quick peek at the data, kind of get a better, so you can get a better sense of the data. Whenever you're working on any kind of data analysis or data science project, I strongly advise you to actually just look at the data before you do anything. Context matters. So rather than just blindly just doing stuff with data, I strongly advise you to actually look at the data and kind of consider, does it make sense to me? Does it make sense to you? Or some of the values you're looking at, does it make sense? Do you understand what the table is telling you? Okay, so let's go back to our studio. Okay, the first function I'm going to use is the head function. So head, and then in parentheses, I'm going to type in the name of my object, housing. Okay, it by default, this then outputs the first 6 rows of my data frame. Okay, so this has my 6 rows in my housing data. So I can go to the housing data here. You can look at the first 6 rows, right? So it's showing me the first 6 rows. Okay, so that's what the head function does. Okay, always a good idea to kind of take a quick preview or a sneak peek at the data and kind of figure out what you're looking at. So by default, the length is 6 rows, but you can also make this longer or shorter. So I can do housing, and the second argument is the number of rows. I can do 10, for example, then you'll get 10 rows as the output. Okay, so Control Enter. Now I'm looking at the first 10 rows of my data. Okay, so the counterpart to the head function is the tail function. So the head function gives you the first 6 rows by default. The tail function gives you the last 6 rows of a data frame by default. So let's run tail housing. You see the last 6 rows of my data frame. Okay, I can go back to housing here and I can scroll all the way down. Take a while and it'll tell you the last 6 rows. It should match up to what you're looking at down here in the console. Same with the head function. You can actually specify the number of rows here. So housing, comma 10 with the tail function. Now you have the bottom 10 rows as well. Okay. Another function that probably useful function is a class function. So I'm going to run class housing, and when you run this, it should say data frame. And so this class function is very helpful. It tells you what type of object you're working with, right? The housing object is that object in my environment right now is a data frame. Okay, if it's a if it's some other type of object, data type, then it'll tell you it differently, right? So let's also do some other things. So let's say I have this housing data and I want to know, for example, the number of observations or number of rows in this data frame. Okay, one way you can do that is to using the nRow function. It tells you the number of rows in this data frame. So there's 506 rows in the data frame. Another way you could do that is using the str function, which str function is probably very, very powerful and useful. Just do str housing. And this actually gives you a lot more information. This tells you on the top here what type of object this is. It's a data frame. So this has, rather than using class, you can use str to tell you on top that this is a data frame. And it tells you there's 506 observations of 19 variables. Okay, and it lists out the 19 variables and even gives you a preview of some of the first few rows of those columns as well. Okay, so which is a very, very useful function, the str function. Okay, so you could think of this as like giving you the structure of your data frame. Okay. Another function I can use is, let's say I want to know the number of observations, number of variables in a different way. I could also use the dim function that I mentioned. So dim housing, and tells you then the first number of reference to rows. So there's 506 rows or 506 observations in 19 columns or 19 variables, as we verified here with the str function. Okay. I could also specify, for example, just the number of rows by putting bracket 1. Okay. And also, I can specify just the number of columns or variables by using bracket 2. Okay. I'm going to access those rows and columns directly by using the bracket function there. Okay. Brackets. Another useful function is a summary function. So let me give myself a little more room here. The summary, let's do summary and housing. Okay. And when I run that, this gives you some statistical summaries. Okay. The first column of my data frame is the character telling it the town name. So they'll just tell you that this is a class character. But all the other ones are numeric. So it gives you some statistical properties like the minimum, first quartile, median, mean, third quartile, maximum for each column. If there's any NA values, it also tell you the number of NA values for each one of these columns or variables as well. Okay, so the summary for reference the entire data frame, it gives you details on every single one. I can also run a summary function on each individual column or variable. So housing $, let's pick median value. Okay, I believe this is the median home value or the median. I believe this is the median home value. Okay, or it might be the median income. I think it's median income value. Okay, so no, I'm sorry. I think this is the median home value. FYI, you can look up what these columns mean by going to, I'll post that as well, the reference to this data set. So when I run summary housing $ median value, it tells you now the mean, first quartile, median, mean, for third quartile, maximum value. I can also do this now for the other numeric columns as well. Okay, I can also do it for, let's say, age. Okay, it's probably the age of the home. Okay, average age of the home probably for that region. Okay. So for numeric value, it'll give you these statistical summaries, right? So let's say what happens if I do this on a character column. Okay, the first one, town, right? As we saw before, this isn't very useful for us, right? So then what can we do if we want to kind of explore, do some initial exploration of a character or usually like a factor column? Okay. You could reference, you could watch some of my other videos dealing with factor variable columns or factor variables. Right now, we know the I run class housing town, this is a character column, right? So then what can we use for a character column? One of the built-in functions I think is very useful is a table function. So I can run table housing $town. I run that. What this does is this tells you each value, the character value, and the number of times it appears in your data frame, right? So for example, the town of Arlington appears 7 times in your data frame. The town of Beacon Hill appears 3 times in your data frame. Okay, so this is again a very useful built-in function. So in summary, these are some of the initial functions that you can use for initial exploration. I use them all the time. They're very, very useful. Head, tail, class, in row, str, dim, summary, etc. Right? So table as well. Right? There are a lot more, but these are, I think, on top of my head, these are some of the easiest ones to remember, and I think probably the ones that you can. They're very effective in terms of giving you an initial impression of the data. Okay, so now let's move on to the next part. Subsetting specific rows or columns of a data frame. So this might kind of be trivial for some of you, but I think for a lot of people who are just starting out, this might be confusing. So I'll kind of give you a little more explanation on this. So in R, these data frames are basically tables, right? Like a spreadsheet table, right? So you got a certain number of rows and columns, right? Okay. You can think of each value inside this data frame as having a coordinate, right? So for example, if I look at this housing data frame, if I pick this value, okay, this is in row 1, column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is in row 1, column 5, right? So every single element here has basically an X row value and a column value. You can think of it as an XY coordinate, right? Okay, so that's the way you can access each one of these values directly. Okay, there are other ways to do this. I'm going to focus on just built-in functions, and really, there are other packages that we would use to kind of do some of these things, but in really the bare bones, at the root, the most common, or not the common, like the easiest way, or the most rudimentary, I would say, way to do this. Okay, so if I look at the housing data frame, okay, if I want to again access the median value, it's in row. Let's say for the second observation, it's in row 2, column 5, right? Okay, so I gotta specify 2 values inside the bracket. Okay, the first value would be the row. Okay, and the second value would be the column. Okay, I'm just using this as a reference here. I'm going to comment this out. I'm going to press Control-Shift-C. Okay, so if you're not familiar with comments are basically exactly what it says. It's a comment. It's not going to actually. When you run this script, nothing happens. It'll just basically R will skip over this line. Okay, but I know then. Okay, I want to put this here so that if I put 2, 5. Okay, what that means is I'm trying to access row 2, column 5. So row 2, column 5, 21.6, right? Okay. So if I want to then, let's say I want to access more than one row and one column at the same time, I can do that by multiple ways, but let's say in consecutive ways. So let's say from row 2 to row 4, and then the 5th column, right? Okay. So 21.6, 34.7, 33.4. What I'm really referencing is these 3 values, right? 23, 21.6, 34.7, 33.4. Okay. I could also specify multiple columns, right? I can also do something like that, right? Okay. So remember the first value before the value inside the brackets, before the first comma is specifying the rows, and the value after the comma is specifying the columns. So then what do you think happens if we don't specify a value at all? Okay, so for example, what if I just do housing 1, comma, and nothing? Okay, would it just give an error? No, what you're telling R to do is return the first row and all the columns. So when you don't specify, you're telling R to return everything. Okay, so what we have here is the entire row 1, okay? What if we only specify the column? Then you're telling R to return all of the rows, and all of the rows for a given column. So if I do this, okay, that means go to the 5th column, 1, 2, 3, 4, the median value, and return column 5 and return all of these values. And that's what you're seeing down here. Okay, so that's how you can access. So another thing I want to add here, you can also, the $ reference. So if I want to access a column, I can also do, for example, I can do housing $ town. If I do this, then I don't need a comma anymore, right? Because I've already specified the column that I want. Okay, if the $ after you, for a data frame, when you put $, you then have to give it the name of the column, right? So if you're in RStudio, it's actually helpful. It gives you some options here. Okay, so if you do this, then I don't have to specify I don't need a comma anymore because I already selected which column I want. Okay, so I'm gonna put a 5 here. Okay, then this tells that you're telling R return the 5th row of column the town value. Okay, so 5th row, town value is more. Let's do 7, so they get the Salem, the first value. Okay, so that's Salem. What happens if you put a comma and enter? You get an error, right? Okay, the incorrect number of dimensions. Okay, another thing I want to show you is that you could also do this. Do housing brackets, and you can put directly the name of the column or the column that you want to return. So if I do, for example, medium value, it returns all of it. Okay, you could also do multiple columns at the same time. So I can do, for example, town, comma, medium value, and it'll return those 2 rows. Okay, and I could even make this simpler and do maybe just the first 5 rows, right? So 1 through 5, comma, town and median value. Okay, so just keep it simple, right? The first value inside a bracket is you're specifying the rows. The value, what your expression after this comma is, you're specifying the columns. And so this is how you subset specific rows or columns of a data frame in a way like how you access specific elements in a table. Okay, that's another way of thinking about it. Now let's go back to slides here and look at the last thing on our topics here. The last thing I want to focus on is the subsetting data frame based on some set of conditions. Again, there's multiple ways to do this in R. I'm going to again use the most rudimentary built-in functions here. Later on, a different video, you can look at the way I use Dippler package, use piping and other methods kind of do the subsetting. But you can actually get everything done by using the built-in functions. Okay, so this is just one way to do it. Okay, so let's say I want to return. If I look at this housing data frame, I just want all the rows where the median value is above 30, value of 30. Okay, so if I look at the data frame, this median value column, I want all of the rows with the values above 30. Okay, so the way you do that in R then is you start with the name of the data frame, okay, and then you put bracket like you did before when you're subsetting, and you simply treat it the same way as before. Now you just set a condition, a logical condition as your row value. Okay, so I'm gonna put a housing here, $, and I want the median value to be greater than 30. Okay, and then press comma. Let's highlight this part here and then press Control Enter. You see there's a bunch of true and false statements. It's true and false values. Okay, so what you're telling R when you run this line, the whole thing, it's taking the housing data frame and specifying whether each row satisfies this condition or not. So at the end, it only returns the rows with a true value, right? So those are the rows where the median value is above 30. Okay, so I'm gonna press Control Enter, and this is now my subsetted data frame. Okay, or the part of out of my entire data frame, these are the records or the observations that satisfy the condition that I've just specified. Okay, So let's do another one. Let's do housing. Let's say I want this time all the rows where the crime rate is less than 0.01. So again, I gotta put a comma here, right? Because I want to select all the columns, right? If I don't do it, put a comma, press enter, there'll be control enter, there'll be an error. So I need a comma to specify which columns I want. But these two towns are the towns where the crime is less than 0.01. Okay. All right. So then let's put those two conditions together. So how do we do that? I'm going to do housing $, median value greater than 30. And then I just have to put and housing $crime less than 0.01. And then now you're left with just one town, a Medfield. Okay, so this satisfies both conditions. If you want to do an or, you just replace the and with a vertical bar. Okay, and now this is a much bigger output. Okay, that's the or. Let me go back to the and. So it's a little shorter output there. And here, let's I'm gonna bring this, copy this down here. Okay, so right now I'm returning all the columns, right? Let's say I just want the name of the town, right? I don't want the whole thing, just one thing at a time. How do we do this? How do we change the output so we only get the town and not the entire row? Okay, I have to specify with a dollar symbol, put town, and now I get rid of the comma, right? So you're telling R, find all the rows that satisfy these two conditions and only return the town column, right? If I run this, you get Medfield, okay? There are a lot of other things you can do here, but I'm gonna pause it here. You can check out some of the other videos explaining some other some of our techniques here. There's a subset built-in function, etc. I'll demonstrate a different video. But this should be enough for you to get started. Make sure you check out some of the other videos you're interested on some of these other techniques. So hopefully this gets you started in R and gets you started wherever you're trying to do. And thanks for watching. Take care. Bye.